Can people add their own options?
Not with the settings that you have enabled, but if people want to ask questions in the chat, that would be great.
I think maybe we'll do that. Let's do that instead.
So if you guys want to get started with questions in the chat, if you have any pressing things that you want to ask or any setup questions, you're welcome to type those in right now. If you have a question that you need to speak instead of type in, we can enable your audio. We just don't want everybody talking at once because that'll get very confusing for everyone.
Yeah.
And we'll get started in maybe 1 more minute.
Seems like a good idea to me.
Oh, I can turn that up. Just a sec. That should be a little bit better.
Hey Drew, maybe for the purposes of the chat, should background noise be disabled?
For me, or for everybody else?
Maybe for you.
Sure. Oh, how did I adjust the audio? So I can go to my screen. There we go. And in the bottom, here, let me share the Zoom part. Right here, under audio settings. And I'll post this right in the chat so you can see exactly what my audio settings are for this. We'll go through a little bit of this during our meeting as well, but basically, oh, we've got more people coming in. Basically, we need to tell the computer exactly what it's hearing, and so it doesn't get confused about whether it's an instrument or a person. And so we'll go through all of those settings probably right at the beginning, because Henry has a whole list of questions that we talked through yesterday. And if you guys want to ask questions into the chat, that would be great too. For settings, there are going to be more settings available in the desktop version of the app than in the iPad or iPhone version. And so they're basically 2 different platforms that will work in different ways. And so if it's possible to use the desktop app, it will give you a lot more options for how to configure your sound and how you can hear other students' sound. So original sound is not an option right now through the iPad. So the app doesn't allow that unless you have another microphone that you can plug into your Apple device, or you can use a Bluetooth microphone and then select that from the audio settings. So, Henry, do you want to get started?
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. So so Drew, do you want to tell us a little bit about the well, the technology that you're using to maybe we don't want to start there. Do you remember where we started yesterday?
Well, we kind of started with talking about what my experience was doing online teaching, and a little bit about my background in online teaching, because it was about 10 years ago when I started doing online lessons. And I started with very much a bare bones kind of laptop computer with a webcam on top of it, and discovered very quickly that it was not an ideal setup. And so over the years, I've adjusted my setup until now I probably do about a third of my lessons, even before this coronavirus epidemic, about a third of my lessons have been online lessons. And so I have students all the way from London all the way out to Hawaii. I communicate with professionals all the way out in Singapore and China. And then most of my students are in the eastern part of the United States. And so they can be in New York, around here in the DC area where I live, who just don't want to battle the traffic all the time. And then a number of students in the Carolinas and Florida. And so we've been doing Skype lessons consistently for many years now. And some students that I have done Skype lessons consistently for about 6 years. And I've seen students, one of my most accomplished students actually, started in Suzuki Book 2, and now he's playing Paganini Caprices and everything, and we've maybe had a dozen in-person lessons. And so it's a completely different situation than a lot of studio teachers experience, where they're doing mostly in-person lessons and the occasional Skype lesson. So it's a little bit of my background on what we're doing in my studio, and it's something that really works effectively. But there are some different ways that we need to teach lessons to make it work online. And so that was what we wanted to do. And Henry is actually a former chamber music student of mine and theory student. And he basically said that he wanted to share some of these insights with the community. And so we put this together a couple days ago, and hopefully you guys learned from it. So Henry, did you have any other questions?
Yeah. So, what kind of setup are you finding is most helpful for the families in your studio to take advantage of online lessons most effectively?
Well, for families, there are basically two different directions that I steer them. And so some families want to have a permanent setup, kind of like what I have right here, something that they can use for weekly lessons consistently. And so in that case, using a computer or a laptop or something that's going to sit on a desk is a great way to have a higher quality setup with a little bit more options, especially if you're going to be doing something like using scores and sharing the music back and forth. So I can go through what I use as a setup and then some recommendations that maybe cost a little bit less for some other families. So probably hands down, as a teacher, the best machine on the market right now is a Microsoft Surface Studio. And that's kind of designed from the ground up as a device that's for online lessons. It's got a webcam, it's got a giant screen that's about 4K, and then it has a pen that enables you to write directly onto the screen. And I use that for almost every single lesson. Now, for most students and families, a device like that isn't necessary, and so we can do a couple different things on their end to reduce the cost and still allow them to have a really good lesson experience. So basically, I give them some basic system requirements. So any computer that's been released within the last couple years should work, but there are a couple things that we want to look for. The first thing is we want to make sure it has a dual core or multi-core processor, because any device that's running on a single core processor will get bogged down, and when the processor gets overwhelmed, it starts to downsample the video and it gets all glitchy and stuttery. And so we need to have that, just kind of as a basic requirement. Another thing is that Zoom and all the other online applications use quite a bit of RAM. And that's the part of the computer that takes short-term memory takes a long-term memory from the hard drive and puts it into short-term memory. And so you want to have a minimum of about 8 gigs of RAM on your computer in order for that to work. We want to have enough overhead so that when they're running another application, such as viewing a PDF or using the whiteboard, it doesn't bog down their computer. Most computers are going to have built-in graphics cards if they're desktops, and that tends to smooth out the experience quite a bit as well. And so most desktops will have a built-in graphics card. Most laptops will have either a graphics card that's kind of built into the CPU or some graphics option. And even today, most integrated graphics cards are good enough to run without any hiccups. Now, I've run into issues with some students who are running on Chromebooks. Those tend to have not quite enough horsepower to really run effectively. And some older computers that are running like the Core 2s and the older Intel processors, when they're running Zoom, those tend to struggle a little bit too.
Hey, so Drew, just so you know, I'm an IT professional, so I get everything that you're saying. But so that we don't lose anybody. So it is what are perhaps there are like just sort of straight away simple guidelines that we can advise our parents of that they can go to. Depending on their basic sort of umbrella kind of needs. So like say they're going on vacation very frequently, perhaps like what kind of options would they want to consider, not just for this pandemic, but say they want to continue online lessons when they're away on like extended family vacation or something like that. Or perhaps even they're interested in continuing online lessons after this pandemic is done because say they have to move away to another state and they want to stay with their current teacher. Perhaps like an iPad would be sufficient, or what do you think about that?
So I would say about half of my students who do online lessons have a more permanent setup, and the other half have a more portable setup. And so what I use, and I can just grab this right now, is an iPad Pro. And
would every family want to get an iPad Pro, or is that necessary?
Not necessarily. So a basic iPad will work just fine. Okay. iPad Air is kind of the base model right now, and that works beautifully. I have several students who use that and they don't have any issues with it. One of the big benefits of an iPad is that it's portable, and that the screen is large enough that you can use it to reliably see what's going on the screen, but it's not so massive that you can't move around with it. It's also very convenient for students who are trying to get their setup figured out and trying to get the height correct. It's light enough that you can just put it on a music stand and not really worry about it. And so it also, I've noticed, works better over slower connections than a computer does, just because it has a lot less overhead. It doesn't have to worry about running the operating system. It doesn't have to worry about running up background. So even on slower connections, iPads tend to do better.
Gotcha. And an iPad Air would perhaps be not so much of a financial investment.
Yes. Well, and also,
which is an important consideration.
Yeah, so the iPad Air is about $500. You can go one generation back, and that's about $400. But there are also refurbished units that most Apple stores will sell, and they have an online section for that where that'll save another $100 or so. In addition, as a teacher, you can sign up through Apple as an educator, and that'll save a percentage off every purchase as well. And so for students who are buying an iPad, I've never had one pay a full price if it's going to be their computer that they use, or it's going to be their iPad that they use for lessons.
So Drew, say I'm a family and I'm not really keen on buying a whole new unit for the sake of online lessons. Maybe I've already got a laptop and my laptop is within the last, say, 4 or 5 years, which is decent. How can I make the quality of my end of the lesson sufficient so that you as the teacher can make an accurate assessment of how well the student is performing for the purposes of instruction in the lesson.
So if parents are looking for a setup that is going to be effective, I'd say About half of what makes online lessons work is having the right hardware, and the other half is having the settings configured properly through the application. If you have the best hardware in the world, but you set it up wrong, you're going to have a very poor experience, versus if you have everything set up correctly, even on less ideal hardware, you're still going to have a much better experience. So what I recommend for parents is get your device set up. Most webcams that are included on relatively recent laptops are perfectly fine. The lowest I think I've seen is about a 480p webcam, which is a kind of lower quality video, but just looking at everybody in the chat, pretty much everybody is running at 720, which is good enough to see individual fingers for lessons and works just fine. So there's no real need, unless they don't have a camera built in already, there's really no real need to buy a camera. There may be exceptions for older devices, but in general, cameras are fine. What I've found really helps is having a separate microphone, and I personally use a Blue Yetis, and the students I recommend use either a Snowball or a Yeti themselves. And these are wonderful because they're really solid, and even with kids knocking them off their desks, they tend to survive just fine. And so the Blue Snowball is about $40, and so for parents that are looking to get started, this is a very reasonable cost. And it's
like a shoulder rest.
Yeah, exactly. It's about the price of a needle level shoulder rest. And so I'll show you guys what this looks like. The prices that are listed online are a little bit higher than you might find otherwise. But here is the Snowball Ice, which is kind of their entry-level model, and it works perfectly fine. They list it for $50. I've seen it as low as $30. It comes in black and white. Like I said, the reason why I like this one is because the audio quality is really good, and because it's basically indestructible. A kid can drop it, and I've had 10-year-olds drop their microphone or whack it with their bow or have it fall over on their desk, and it survives pretty much anything. And so this is the one that I recommend the highest. There are some other ones that are a little bit nicer. So the standard Snowball is a little bit nicer than that. Not really noticeable in terms of audio quality. And then if students jump up to the Yeti, this is kind of the benchmark for audio streaming and stuff. Generally, I see it around $80 online, and this one has a really sturdy base on it, so it's very difficult to knock over. And it has a couple extra settings for the way that the microphone records sound. So most of the time when we're recording, we want it to record what's right in front of us. But sometimes if there's a parent sitting off to the side who wants to talk, then you might need a wider field for the microphone, and the Yeti gives you that flexibility that's not available for some of the other microphones.
Gotcha. So that snowball microphone seems like it's a really economical option for students' families to look at and find on eBay, on Amazon. In fact, I think we were looking last night. It's on Amazon.
Yes.
For pretty good.
Yeah. So you should be able to find it pretty much anywhere. Like I said, I found it on Amazon just yesterday as we were confirming that everything's there. It's on Amazon for about $40. And the type of microphone, I just saw this in the chat, these are all large diaphragm condenser microphones. And so these are a nice middle ground. They're not too expensive, and they're not so narrow and so small that they're going to end up with a tinny sound. And so I can demonstrate a little bit, if you guys would like, the difference between the Yeti microphone that I have and the built-in webcam microphone on my computer, just so you guys can hear the difference. And so I'll go grab my violin really quick. How many people in the chat, if you guys raise your hands, how many people here are string players? Everyone? Awesome. Okay. So let me go grab my violin real quick, and I'll show you a little bit of what this sounds like.
Hey Emily, I see your question in the group chat. Perhaps we can fiddle around and see if we can find the answer to your question at the end of the webinar. And if you're not able to stay that long or something like that, you can feel free to come to one of the open Zoom support sessions. I'm running those 6 to 7 tonight, tomorrow, and Friday. So you can feel free to come and join, but maybe we can find the answer to your question at the end of the
We have a Suzuki piano teacher among us. Wonderful. So there are some different considerations for piano that I do want to mention if you're a Suzuki piano teacher, because you need to have a different view of your hands if you're demonstrating. So if you'd like, I can show you exactly what I'd recommend for piano teachers, because it's a little bit different than violinists. So I'll just play a little bit of the difference and then describe the settings and show you guys how I have it configured. So here's the Yeti Pro microphone that I use most of the time. It should be about the right audio level. So everybody, can you show me with your thumbs? This sounds pretty good over? Yeah, it should sound pretty decent. Now I'm going to switch over to the array microphone that's built into my computer so you can hear the difference. And then back to the Yeti. So do you guys agree that this sound quality is a little bit different? Over the array microphone, what ends up happening is, because these are such tiny little microphones, it's about a 1 millimeter dot. And if you could look at the top of your display, you should see it's a tiny little hole. That's the actual microphone, and it's so narrow that it really can't do well with frequencies that are on the lower end of our instrument. So it tends to just chop them off. The Yeti has a large enough diaphragm on the microphone that it can absorb a lot of the bass sounds and the reflections around the room. And so it gives you a much fuller, more enjoyable sound to listen to. So I saw in the chat that there are some settings on this. The Yeti Pro, I set the Yeti microphone, I set the gain as low as I can with the ability to actually hear it still. And so it's almost all the way down. So it's maybe about 10% gain on the microphone. On the software side, in Windows, I have it set around 50%. And that kind of gives me the right balance. Oh, we have a vocal teacher, wonderful. And so the cardioid pattern is kind of a standard for most microphones, and it's almost like a heart shape that wraps around the front of the mic. And that's kind of a good setting for anyone who's sitting right in front of the microphone. You'll find more success with parents sitting next to them if you open up that setting and you do the 180 degrees in front of the microphone if you have parents who need to talk a lot during the lesson. But the cardioid seems to work for students right in front of the mic.
We have not talked about that yet.
Speed yet. So, Henry, did you say something?
Oh, I was answering the same question at the exact same time in the exact same way.
So, so the microphone gain makes a really big difference. If you turn it up too high, then the microphone has too much signal and it tends to sound very, very staticky. It has a sort of crunchy effect on the sound. And so we want to make sure that that's as low as possible so that you don't get any extra stuff in there. Okay?
So let's see. Perhaps a quick summary is that there's an economical option that your standard webcam in a laptop, or say that's in the last 4 or 5 years, is probably going to be fine as far as a camera goes. And then looking into one of these snowball blue microphones would be a good way to get a decent sound where your teacher can make an accurate assessment of your playing.
Yes.
And that setup would probably work for teachers too, who are also interested in a more economical or sort of setup. And then of course you can go up from there in terms of what you're using. And then of course, no matter what you're using, you need the right settings enabled or else it won't sound fantastic.
So to go and answer some of the questions that I'm seeing as well, yes, absolutely. It does make a difference on both sides if you have an external mic. For students and families that are having their lesson at home, having a microphone does not impact their experience at all. It impacts your ability as a teacher to evaluate their tone properly. And so when I demonstrate, just like I did for you, for most parents, it really opens their eyes to, wow, my teacher can hear a lot more about what my child is doing. Maybe we need to invest in this so that they can hear the best sound from my child and actually make an assessment of their tone. So yes, even on a smaller violin, I have lots of students who do their Skype lessons who are 6, 7, 8 years old, and even on a small violin, it makes a world of difference. Once again, it's because the little pinhole microphones tend to take out all of the bottom end of the instrument. It's really important if you want to have a sanity at the end of the day and not have a migraine from all of the shrieking sound that will come through the microphone just because it's cutting off the bottom end. So with the students who use an external mic, it makes a big difference for my sanity at the end of the day.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It definitely will be difficult for parents to add additional equipment right now, and so some of the parents are just making do with settings, especially for those who are new to Skype lessons or to online lessons in general during this time, but a lot of them understand that it is something to invest in at a point in the future. So I do see another question about preamps, and I did try this setup when I had my studio up in New York. And I actually can say, even using a top end, I was using a ribbon microphone. It was a woodpecker microphone, about a $1,500 mic with an XLR output going through a connector box into my computer. And I can honestly say it didn't make that much of a difference. And that's because at a certain point, the signal that the microphone is getting is so much higher than what the program can convey over the internet that the microphone quality doesn't really matter after a certain point. So you could connect a $1,500 or a $2,000 microphone and it won't give you a noticeably better experience than using a Snowball or a Yeti.
So Drew, one of the most problematic elements of going to online seems to be the problem of playing with your students, but actually it sounds like there's a way past that. Can you explain that?
Sure. So this is a discovery that I made many years ago, and this is that if a student mutes their own audio, they can actually play with me. And then have the parents kind of evaluate the sound over that, or use the recording to evaluate their sound later on. And so especially for Suzuki students who really benefit from having support of me playing an accompaniment part along with it, it really makes a difference. And so Henry can demonstrate a little bit of this, and it won't work as well with so many people. We can talk about group classes at a later point, but if Henry mutes his audio and he sings along with me, Henry's gonna yep, so Henry's muted. And let's just do Go Tell Aunt Rhody. So. And ready, go. And so Henry's able to sing along with me while I'm playing, just like we would in the lesson. Now, as a teacher, I have to realize that he's going to be about 0.2 seconds behind me on average. And so when you're looking at, is the student getting the right bowings, it is a little bit of training in your mind to say, they're going to be playing 1 to 2 notes behind me all the time. And so it's one of those things that you get into seeing, almost like if you're sitting at the back of the second violin section, like 6 stands back, and you're seeing what the bowings look like at the front, and it feels like they're a half a beat ahead of you all the time. You'll get used to seeing it, and seeing if your section leader's doing the same bowings as you. It's the same kind of thing.
It
does take a little bit of practice, but it works very, very well.
Gotcha. It works very well for the student, I imagine.
Absolutely, yes.
If we talked yesterday a little bit about recording, that like, so say you're recording the lesson, the recording that the student ends up with will have you playing, and so that they can play with it again. If they
Another thing that I'll do very often, and just so I'm seeing this, yes, Henry muted himself, and so I did not hear him singing along with me. And so what happens if you play, and I'm sure many of you have discovered this already, if you try to play simultaneously with a student, you'll end up with this awful echo, horrible thing that kind of spirals out of control until you stop making any sound. And so him muting his own audio is a way for us to play together, and then him giving me a yes, I got all the notes, or the parent sitting next to him saying, yes, this sounded good. It is a concession you have to make, because you cannot hear what your student's doing while they're muted, but you can generally see if their bowing is correct, and especially for younger students, if they have indications on their fingerboard, you can see if they're more or less in tune. And so it does take practice, and most of the time, once we've played as a duet, I'll ask the student to play on their own, especially if it's something that they're trying to get for the first time.
Let's see, so the same method seems to work for group class, or how do you run group lessons like that?
So what you've been noticing throughout this entire thing is, as Henry's talking, I'm selecting his video so that everybody can see him play. And so in Zoom meetings, this is called spotlighting a video. And so if you're doing a group class, generally over meetings, I'll have everyone in the class muted except for maybe one student at a time. And from the teacher side, as the meeting host, I can have them enable their audio and then disable all of their audio on my end. And so I can decide, I want to hear Susie play, I want to hear David play, and then mute them so that I don't get a cacophony of sound on my end. And so you can kind of go single student one at a time for that. But then, for example, if we're going around and I'm saying, let's do our pepperoni pizza rhythm, and I want to hear Henry play his pepperoni pizza rhythm, I'm going to play, and then Henry gets his violin ready to go, and then I can spotlight him, and then he can enable his audio, he plays his rhythm, and the whole class can see him play. And so it's a way to do this not necessarily as smooth as you would be able to do in person, where it's just, okay, you play, then you play, then you play. But it definitely is a way for students to feel like they're being featured in the class. Another thing that Zoom meetings does very well is it allows students to provide feedback. And so I did this as part of my technique class earlier this week, where the students, I didn't hear a single note that most of them played for the entire class, but I asked them as we went through a scale, so we played a G major 3-octave scale, and I said, if it's good, if you didn't miss anything, if you didn't fall behind, give me a thumbs up. And you can give a thumbs up either just showing through the video, or you can go down to reactions and you can hit thumbs up. And
it's in the toolbar.
And everyone will be able to indicate that. And so if I see a whole class full of thumbs up, then I know that everybody was successful. If I see somebody, yep, there you go, Emily. And so everybody should be able to give some feedback. Yes, I understood how to do that. Or if I don't see that, or if I see a student who's like, no, 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 this is not correct, then I can kind of go through and do it again.
Let's see. I just want to acknowledge Janice's question about connecting parents for a seminar. Janice, maybe we can talk about how to do it at the end of the webinar, or you can join for these open Zoom support sessions tonight, 6 to 7 EDT, tomorrow or Friday. There's an event page in the distance learning forum.
So, Henry, I was seeing a couple things about how to set up the settings in Zoom correctly.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea to.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just show you what I use for my settings, and this seems to work very, very well. And so I'm going to share this with all of you. This is how my settings are currently configured, and I'll show you guys in 2 separate pictures and explain kind of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So everybody should see this in about 1 second. Share this. So these are my settings right here. And you can notice that my volume slider is about 55 to 60% up, and this is where I like it to be most of the time. So this volume indicator right here. I want this not to be too high because otherwise the microphone is just going to be a little bit harsher. What I do want it to do is not automatically adjust the volume. And that's really important because when you're going on a lesson, normal speaking voice is a lot less than instrument volume. And so whenever students play their instrument without these settings enabled, the program thinks that you're shouting at it. And this is how I explain it to parents, where the program thinks that we're having a nice quiet conversation, and then I pick up my violin and the program goes, oh my goodness, you're shouting, and then it tries to mute the student. And so what we need to do is tell the program, no, it's okay. You can let the volume remain at the volume setting that we have set. So we leave it about 50%, automatically adjust the volume like this, and then I have parents go down to this advanced settings button right down here, and this is where it really starts to make a difference on their end, because this will disable a lot of the features of the program that are going to get in the way. And so once you click that audio settings and then the advanced button, then you'll have something that looks like this. You give me 1 more second. I'll share this part as well. And so here is the next one. This is the settings for the advanced one. And so what I've done, because I have noises, because I have a commercial space, and so there's noises that come from the floors above. So I have this usually set right here to moderate or disabled. And so if there's any background noise, so if there's a fan running, or if there's the air conditioner, or if there are siblings running around in the background, then we want to have a little bit of background noise suppression. But if it's a quiet environment, we really want to disable that. And so just because I have some noise in my space right now, I have it set to moderate. For intermittent background noise, we want to disable that entirely, because then it will think, if this is enabled, that accents on your instrument or loud chords are actually background noise. So we want to cancel that so that you can actually hear those chords being played. Usually I find leaving echo cancellation on helps, just because if it gets into an echo, that'll minimize it pretty quickly. And the program, Zoom Meetings, is pretty good with its echo cancellation, much better than Skype. And so I just leave that unless it's a problem. So those are the settings that I use, and hopefully that's a little bit of help. For the system settings.
Do you use original sound?
So because I have a good quality mic, yes. I enable original sound on my microphone. Most students, I want them not necessarily to enable that, unless the settings that I just described don't work for them. For parents and students who have an iPad or are trying to do lessons on a phone, there is no option for original sound, and there's no option to disable some of those extra settings. And so that's just one of the concessions that we have to make for using a mobile device. But because iPads are actually set up very well, they have 2 microphones up here and they have 2 microphones down here. So the iPad Pro and the iPad Air both should have a 4 microphone array, and it's pretty good right out of the box. If you have an older generation iPad, or if you're trying to use an iPhone, or or any Android device. I really don't know Android devices very well, I'm sorry. But if you're trying to use a phone, then you're going to have much less success because the microphones are all on one end of the device, and then the other microphone is the little pinhole above the camera. So you'll have a lot less success using a phone than you would on a tablet.
Drew, are there any circumstances on a tablet under which you would attach an external microphone, or would that only be for an older device?
So I would say in general for iPads, yes, you can. It's not necessarily required. There are some options that will work and will substantially improve the quality, but they're pricey. And so there are a couple of them I'll show you guys right now. One of them is the Zoom series, the IQ series. And so these microphones will plug directly in to the audio port on your iPhone or your iPad. And this will substantially increase the audio quality, but these are not inexpensive. These microphones will start at about $100.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so one of them is made by Zoom, and it works very, very well. Another one, and this is a little bit higher quality still, this one is the MV88 from Shure. Once again, noticeable increase in audio quality, but it's not inexpensive. And so unless you're really encountering a lot of problems using an iPad, I'd recommend just sticking with the built-in array mic because it seems to work pretty well in 99% of my lessons.
Gotcha. I want to acknowledge a couple of questions. One is Des Moines Symphony Academy says, "Are those specific for parents?" I believe that you're asking about the Zoom support sessions. They're for the teachers in the distance learning forum, but I can see a situation where we can make this video available to your parents as a YouTube link, so that your parents can watch this webinar for the list of settings and general guidance on using Zoom effectively. I hope that would be sufficient, but you can certainly stick around to the end of the webinar and we can chat about it, or you can come and join one of the Zoom support sessions and we can chat more. There's a question from Richard Todd. I have a brand new MacBook Pro. Do I still need to purchase an external microphone? Drew, can you talk to that?
So I worked on the Apple side of things. I'm now on the Microsoft side of things, and the microphones on MacBooks are better than most, but still not going to be nearly the quality of an external mic. The reality is just there's no space in a MacBook to put a 1-inch diaphragm microphone. And so if you want to evaluate this with your students and ask them, is the sound quality that you're hearing somewhat consistent to what you hear in lessons? And if they say, yes, it's great, then by all means, stick with it. I do have students who will ask at the beginning of the lesson, oh, are you using your built-in mic or are you using your external one? Because they can hear the difference between those two. And at the beginning of this session, we demonstrated that. And does everybody pretty much agree that you can hear the difference between a built-in microphone? Yes? Yeah, you can definitely hear the difference. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. Yes, you can hear the difference. So I would recommend, if you're planning on doing this long term, or if you're planning on using this at least for the next few weeks, it'll help your parents and your students hear you better. And one of the big things as Suzuki teachers is we always tell the parents and the students to listen to superior models. And if you're demonstrating at a poorer audio quality, then you're not really giving them a model that they should be emulating. And so the reason why I use a quality microphone is because I want to produce the sound that they need to emulate. One of the other things that I do sometimes, sorry, Henry, I'll get to your question.
That's okay.
Is in the event that a student really needs a higher quality recording, what I will do is I'll actually open up Adobe Audition or Audacity and record it alongside the lesson. So I'll have the student mute themselves. They can hear me demonstrate for them, but then I have a really high quality, like DVD quality audio that I have right there. And so I'll just do this in Audacity right now. I'll just play Twinkle or something so you guys can see kind of how this works. So this is what I do a lot of the times to demonstrate, especially for students doing etudes or later books where they really need a good quality recording. So I will have Henry mute himself. And then in my computer, I'm going to open up Audacity. Since this is a free recording studio software, I'm just going to demonstrate using this. And in Audacity, I'll share my screen in just a moment. So here is Audacity. And everybody can see this. This is just the recording software. And so I'm demonstrating Twinkle Twinkle Little Star for my students. So I start this recording. And then at the end of my recording, I just press stop, and then I export this as an MP3. I just dump it onto the desktop of my computer. There we go. Don't need any of those settings. And it's saved right there automatically. And then I go into Zoom, find that file on my desktop that I just created, and I can dump it straight into the chat so that a student now has a very high quality recording of what I just made. And so you guys should see this appear in the chat once it uploads, which will be just a couple seconds. Here's a recording of my Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Oh, I have a private chat going on right now. Let me cancel that out. Unless it's going to disable this for group chat, which it is. There it goes. And so what I can do instead is use this as a Dropbox link because it's doing as a group chat. This will you'll normally enable just, you can dump it straight in, but for this case it's not going to work because I have 50 people connected to the call right now. So back to desktop. So here we go. This is now on Dropbox, and I can send everybody a Dropbox link to my wonderful Twinkle recording. And now everybody has access to this. Please don't go stealing my recording. I know it's a great quality Twinkle.
Copyrighted.
And so, like I said, usually you can just dump it straight in if you're doing a one-on-one lesson with a student, but that little extra step with Dropbox just means that now the student has a permanent link anyway, so even after this, it will be available. When students close out of Dropbox, or close out of Zoom meetings, they will still have access to the chat, and it will give a little download indicator for all of these things. So a lot of the time I'll have a score that we're working on, and I'll have that on the screen, and we'll be able to write in it, and then at the end of that, I'll be able to save it, just drag it and drop it into the chat at the end of their lesson, so they have a copy of what went into the score.
Drew, this is a good segue into another question from Drake about best practices for recording / live streaming the Zoom meetings. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but perhaps we could go a little more into depth about it, because there are certain. It seems that recording the lesson. Which I assume is what Drake means. Recording the lesson is can be a technological demand, and yes. maybe it wouldn't be in the best interests of your storage space on your hard drive to attempt to do that.
So yes, absolutely. With the built-in recording stuff that's built into Zoom, it can automatically do a good high-quality recording of an entire lesson. What I find is it's usually about 1.5 gigabytes per hour of lesson.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
It is a lot. So unless you have several terabytes of storage just sitting on your desk, this will fill up your hard drive in a matter of a couple weeks. And I don't know how many people have, terabytes of storage. Most computers now are shipping with around 1 to 2 terabytes on average. And so if you put that in context, it means filling up your entire hard drive in about 100 lessons.
Which would be really fast, and that's generally like desktop models.
Yeah.
A laptop model is going to have 250 megs or gigs. Words. Are there ways around? Are there ways around that, or?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the easiest ways around this is to, just like I demonstrated with Twinkle, just have Audacity running in the background and just make an audio recording of the lesson. Or just have, you can have your phone sitting there or have a separate device recording the lesson, and then have that just audio recording alone dropped into the chat at the end of the lesson. I have many, many students who appreciate, especially teenagers, who appreciate having that audio recording at the end, because they're, 3 days later, they're going to ask me, oh, what was that second lesson point on the lesson that we had last Thursday? I don't know. And so I can just say, go listen to your lesson recording. You can find out what that was, and we'll check in at our next lesson. Because I don't remember the timestamp that I give every single teaching point during every single lesson.
Thomas Gadd has a helpful suggestion that you could upload the video as a private link on YouTube.
Yes.
And that's certainly absolutely a viable option and you can provide it to your students that way. I could see it eventually becoming perhaps annoying to download, like you're downloading the video from Zoom at the end of the lesson, and then you're going to YouTube and you have to wait for it to upload to YouTube. It could potentially create multiple more hours of work for you to attempt to do it that way.
Plus, when you're doing the Zoom download, will have a proprietary format and will require a pretty significant amount of rendering time just to convert it from the Zoom video format to a video format that you can use on your computer. There is a checkbox in the settings that says, make this format ideal for editing and for future use. If you check that box, it'll actually render it in a slightly higher format and compress it in a different way so that it will upload to YouTube faster. But once again, you're waiting for it, and I've seen, even on my computer, which is a fairly capable machine, it'll take about 45 minutes to render a single 1 hour video. And then you're looking at, yeah.
That could be a little too long. I didn't realize that.
Then it doubles the amount of storage space because you have the 1.3, 1.5 gig file from the Zoom recording, and then you have another one, which is the uncompressed video file, which is another 1.5 gigs, and then you have to upload a 1.5 gig file, which is completely limited by your computer's connection speed. And so on a standard cable connection, that'll take you probably close to 6 hours to upload a file that big.
That could be too long. That could be too long. So it sounds like the audio only option by using Audacity in the background. And Audacity is not a heavy program. You can certainly run it that way.
Yeah.
So basically you start the lesson, and then you press record on Audacity and let it go through the duration of the lesson. I imagine that in Audacity you'd want to select the right microphone, right?
Yes.
System line in, perhaps.
Yes, and you want to have the microphone settings pretty much the same as the ones that you're using for the call. And so when I started up Audacity, I automatically set the microphone gain to what I wanted and made sure that the levels were not maxing out when I was playing. And so in a recording program, most of the times it'll highlight the gain as a bar, or as a vertical or horizontal bar, or sometimes as a circle diagram, where if it's showing yellow or red consistently, then the gain is way too high and you'll need to dial that back down.
Drake wants to clarify, what about live streaming, and how is that different, and can you live stream? And my additional question on top of it would be, can you live stream privately?
Well, you can live stream through Zoom to either Facebook groups or to YouTube. And so there is a setting at the bottom. You can enable this. I believe you need to have a pro account, so it will not work on the free version of the app, but you should be able to live stream to YouTube. and that can be set up through your YouTube account as a private link or an open link. So yes, you can live stream. Yes, you can do that through Zoom. I have not done that, but I know that it works, and I've seen people do it before.
Gotcha. So if you have the, so you need the pro version in order to do that. But if you have the pro version and you live stream to YouTube as a private link, then that could be a good way to sidestep your local machine's technical capabilities, as well as your own internet connection speeds.
Yep. Another thing to consider is that Zoom does allow, they have a limited amount of cloud storage. And so you can have it store a certain amount of recordings, depending on the level of the plan that you have. You could have it store some of those recordings on their servers so that it doesn't occupy your own hard drive space. Now, it does mean that manipulating those files is a little bit more difficult because you have to download it, then work on it, then upload it again. But you can definitely make it work, especially if you have a limited hard drive capacity. But I've had much more success doing audio only for student lesson recordings. And the students generally, when they receive that file, an hour-long lesson in MP3 format is only about 50, 60 megabytes. And so it's an order of magnitude smaller file size than a video file.
Hey, Drew, let's talk about a couple more things. I'm curious about as far as scheduling your Zoom lessons.
Yes.
How do you work with the Zoom mechanics in order to do that? Zoom, has two meeting types. Either you can schedule them or do an instant meeting. And there's a mountain of settings that are available. Zoom is a very powerful program. There's a lot that you can do with it. How do you choose to use it to best teach online?
So already I do a fair amount of online teaching before this entire epidemic crisis started. And so I've been using Google Calendar for a very long time. And so Zoom actually integrates very well into Google Calendar. If you have either Firefox, Chrome, or the Apple browser, Safari, there are extensions for Zoom in that. And so if you go, for example, I use Chrome, Google Chrome, the web browser. You can download an extension that's called Zoom Scheduler, and it plugs right into whatever calendar application you use. So whether it's Microsoft Outlook, I use Google Calendar, it has a number of other ones that will work. And so I can just open up my calendar, and it adds a little button that says, make this a Zoom meeting. And so, for example, I'll make a lesson with Henry right now. Let me get over to my calendar, and I'll invite Henry to a lesson.
Perhaps if you can you share your screen and
yes,
kind of show people what it looks like?
Give me 1 sec.
Take your time.
I'm gonna make this lesson for very, very far in the future, just so that it doesn't conflict with anything. Henry's lesson is gonna be October 14th. And
can't wait. I can't wait.
Okay.
I want to answer Cameron Tong's question real quick. Yes, generally speaking, live streams are recorded on whatever platform that you choose to do them on. So yeah, you can live stream through YouTube, and at the end of the live stream, your YouTube account will send you an email and say, "Hi, you made this live stream. Here's the video recording of your live stream."
Thank you, Henry. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody right now and show how I've integrated this through my calendar. So here's my Google Calendar right here. And Henry's lesson is going to be Wednesday the 14th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to say Henry Smith. And I'm going to invite Henry as my student. So he's going to receive a notification that we're doing a lesson at this time. Now, I'm not going to put anything into any of the other fields. I'm just going to hit make it a Zoom meeting. And this button will only appear if you have the Zoom Scheduler extension built in. And so Henry will get a notification in about 2 seconds saying that this is his lesson time. And he's going to receive a link. And it's going to have this little button right here that says join Zoom meeting. And it's also going to have a link right here and the meeting ID number. Now, you can set this up two different ways, and I've done it both ways, and my parents seem to think that the Google Calendar way is the easier one. And so they just click the link, and they join the meeting automatically. And I can see them come in on my end to the waiting room, just like you guys are doing for this right now. I see them come into the waiting room, and it doesn't mean that I have to disrupt a current lesson. So they come into the waiting room, I accept their lesson when it's their time. So, Henry, did you get that notification?
I did, and I opened up the email, and it said, "You have this meeting? Yes, maybe, no," and I said yes.
Okay, and so is that helpful for everybody? This is just the way that I found works. Okay, yes. Okay, wonderful. You can also do this by creating a meeting or starting a Zoom meeting on your own. Oh, can I show how to set it up? I would have to uninstall in order to show you how to do that, but I can show you exactly where it is, and so that you can install it yourself. Yes, give me 1 second to go to the extensions.
The extension will basically take care of itself, right? Or
Yeah.
or perhaps you have to maybe log into the extension in order for it to.
Basically, if you're
Make
logged
public?
into Zoom already, the extension will handle all of that. You just basically say, I'm going to log in through this account. And so if you have a Gmail account or an Outlook account or any sort of other web, so if you have any sort of calendar program, it'll allow you to do that. So this, I'll share it with everybody. So this is the Chrome Web Store. And all you need to do in this is search Zoom schedule. And it's this first hit right here. You click on this, and then you'll have an install button instead of a remove from Chrome button. And so once you hit this, it'll come up with a little dialog box asking you to sign in, and it'll give you a bunch of options about allowing this to access certain parts of your calendar and everything like that. And then once that's all set, you'll probably have to restart your browser, and then once you go to Google Calendar, you'll be able to see that little Zoom meeting button embedded into every single calendar invitation.
Same day and to invite them. So Scotia Suzuki School says to me, so there's a weekly lesson always the same day and time. Do I have to invite them again each time? If it's running through the Zoom scheduler through Google Calendar, you can probably create a recurring meeting, correct?
Yes, and so a lot of the times, if I use, like I said, I use Google Calendar, but this is going to be true for any calendar application. If you set it as a recurring meeting, the extension will also set that link as a recurring link. Zoom is actually designed as kind of an enterprise level software, and so they're designed for board meetings and stuff that take place weekly, and so we'll give you a consistent link that'll take place over that entire time. I see Richard is asking, is this the same as Safari? Yes, all of the major browsers will have extensions that'll work the same way, and Zoom is pretty good about making everything cross-platform compatible. For Emily, I'm seeing, can you set a reminder notification? Yes, absolutely. You can set it for 15, 30, 60 minutes, a day before, all of that stuff, and that I do directly through Google Calendar. Parents will receive a lesson notification about 5 minutes before their lesson's supposed to take place. Also, when I send the invitation, they receive an email right away.
Just like all other events in your Google Calendar, you can set notifications and manipulate it, change colors, things like that. Make notes.
So, Sarah, yeah, you can set this up in multiple different ways. The way that I've set it up is kind of a waiting room. And so everybody can log in through one same link into one single waiting room, or you can set it up as separate lessons that take place over the course of the day. Both ways work just fine. Absolutely. To Richard Todd, who says that, who asks if it works the same with Safari, I do believe it does. Yes.
All right.
Why don't we open this up for a couple other questions, if anybody has any last questions. Hopefully this has been helpful and informative for everyone.
Real quick question, Drew. Do you have any kind of guide that you've set up on your website that perhaps people would find as a useful resource?
Yes. So through my website, I'll enable this right after this meeting, so it'll be active in about 2 minutes. I have a web page that goes through all of the different hardware recommendations that we've talked about and all of the different software settings. And so everything is linkified, so you can just click on the links and it'll take you right to the microphones that I recommend and the different devices. It has pictures of exactly how I've configured my settings. And so I'll make that public link available right after this. I'll put it in the chat after this meeting ends. So yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. So I guess perhaps we can...
Unless we have any extra questions, I thank you. I have to go teach now. Yes, I have to teach soon too. Yeah.
Let's see. We've got a question about how would Google Calendar work? So Google Calendar, Zoom scheduler. How would that work? Would that work differently for a group lesson, or would you simply just send? Would you include multiple people in that email notification so that multiple people can accept?
So yes, the way that Google Calendar works, you can just have on the invitation line, you can put as many people as you want. So for all of my group classes, I'll have 15 people in the invitations, and they can all indicate whether they can do it or not. And so this is the way that we do whether everybody is sick in a group class, because I'm not going to do a group class if it's less than 3 people there. And so if I see, oh yeah, 13 people out of my 15 that I've invited are going to make it, then yes, we're good for that class that day. And so it's a great way to gauge attendance as well. So yes, you can invite multiple people. And then how do you drag an audio recording? It will not work in a chat like this because there's just too many people. There are 2 different ways that you can do an audio recording in the chat. One of them is, like I just demonstrated earlier in the session, having Audacity. Create that file, dump it onto your desktop, and then in a single one-on-one lesson, you can just drag it straight into the chat and it'll give a little drop icon. Just drop it in and it'll upload it automatically. If that doesn't work, like in this case that we demonstrated with this many people, what I did is I dragged it into my Dropbox. Dropbox automatically makes a link for it. I right-click and say copy Dropbox link and put the link to my Dropbox file into this chat. So both ways work. The advantage of the Dropbox link is it will be a permanent link. And so even if it's 2 months later, they'll still have access to that file. Versus the chat, which is deleted after the file or after the lesson ends, or unless it's a single student that's doing a recurring lesson time, then it'll keep that. Really good question about recommended internet speeds. So,
I forgot about that.
Yes. So in general, with no other programs running, and what's really important, especially if you're running on a Windows computer, make sure that it does not try to do updates to software in the background, because those will just gobble up your entire bandwidth. So disable your Windows updates until 3 o'clock in the morning. Make sure that Office isn't updating. Make sure that you're not doing your Dropbox sync. Make sure that all of that stuff is disabled so that the most bandwidth is available for your Zoom lessons. So if everything is pretty much disabled, what you'll end up seeing is connection speed of around 4 megabytes per second is what's used for a standard quality call. If you're going to try and do an HD call, it's going to be more like 12. So most standard quality internet connections will work. The one problem is that for parents and for teachers on both ends during peak hours, the connection speeds that you're advertised are not what you're receiving. So when cable internet connection speeds, they're going to quote the maximum that they're going to give you. During peak primetime hours for TV, you're going to get maybe a third of that. And that's just because so much of the bandwidth is being consumed by people watching television that you're not going to be able to get as much. So in general, you want to get a much higher level plan than is actually necessary just to plan for that overhead. So the connection.
It's kind of sneaky.
Sorry?
It's kind of sneaky on the part of the company, but maybe we won't comment too much on that right now.
Everyone loves Comcast. And so what I end up doing, and this is because I do so much online teaching, and I realize this isn't available for everybody everywhere, I have a dedicated business class cable connection. And so this is a single line that they wired into my storefront. It is a dedicated line, which means that no matter what's going on my block with everybody watching television or whatever, it means that my connection speed is minimally impacted by this. I actually have a 300 megabytes down, 100 megabytes up connection speed, and I find that that's perfectly reliable any time of day. Also, because I'm doing so much recording and so much web work, it enables me to upload my video files and download files a lot faster than I would otherwise. I do realize it's expensive, but since so much of my teaching is online already, it is totally a necessary cost for my business to have a connection speed that's that fast. Oh, what is an HD call? Great question.
Yeah.
So standard definition is going to be, it's measured in how big the video is. And so these are kind of if you look at your phone screen has pixels on it and you'll be able to see the little dots. The numbers are how many dots vertically and horizontally are going to be the resolution of the video. So if you're looking at an old VHS tape or something, that's kind of consistently around what we call 480p today, which means about 480 pixels. Most webcams are capable of a 720p, which is considered like normal definition. A while back they called it an HD, but really 720p is kind of a minimum for what we want for a Skype lesson, because you'll be able to see fingers individually. The ideal is a 1080p or a 4K call. Most connection speeds, even mine, is not really capable of a 4K call, and most cameras aren't able to do that just yet. So 1080p is kind of the standard that we want, and then you'll see usually a number following that. So 720p 30, 720p 60, 1080p 30, or 1080p 60. And that's telling you how many frames per second. And so, like, as I'm looking through everybody, there are some people I can tell that they have a lower frame rate and some people who have a higher frame rate. And so if you want a smoother video and you don't want to see any shadows of their hand moving with their bow, you want to optimize your settings for a higher frame rate, even if you sacrifice some video quality. So in terms of seeing students perform, 720p 60 is better for high quality playing, so you can see what they're doing at speed, than even 1080p 30. And so you want to prioritize the frame rate over the top resolution.
And that kind of enters into what we were talking about towards the beginning of the video, where most people's camera quality is sufficient for the purposes of seeing shapes, seeing where their fingers are landing, but in order to avoid choppiness in what you're seeing with them, then a higher frame rate would be better.
So for example, if you're looking at Henry's video right now is going to be a 1080p, probably 1080p 30. So if you wave your hand back and forth, do you see how his hand gets a little fuzzy? Here, I'll spotlight Henry real quick. So Henry, can you do that one more time? See how his hand gets a little bit fuzzy?
The fuzz.
And so that's because his frame rate is not quite as high as it could be. Yep, and everybody's checking their frame rate right now. Wonderful. So if you look at my frame rate, you'll see that there's probably a little bit smoother than when Henry was doing this, yes?
I still see some fuzz, but maybe that's got to do with my...
And that's partly because of the delay, but this is a 1080p 60 camera, and it's a much, much higher speed connection than most people are going to get on the receiving end. So once again, in the interest of presenting students with the highest quality performing and recording and teaching that we can, it's good on my end if I have the highest quality camera, microphone setup, and connection speed as possible. For students, it's not nearly as important. And so you don't need to tell your student, you need to go buy a 1080p 60 webcam right now. They really don't need it. It's really, if you want to be able to see them clearly, then 720p 30 is totally fine.
Cameron Tong is curious about a 4. I'm not positive because there's a lot of letters after that 4, but I believe that's a 4 megabit per second connection speed. Some people do deal with that kind of thing, and not everybody has access to. I mean, say I'm at work here right now. My work network connection speed is a business class just like yours. So so we can do this. But not everybody's able to do it. Some people deal with certain sorts of setups at home where the company, the network company is maybe not able to provide as much of a bandwidth. How do you manage dealing with that kind of situation? Like, is the only option to try to upgrade your network speed?
So once again, just like for for when we're talking about getting the connection speed clear as possible. The best thing that you can do is make sure that your computer is not running anything else, and that nobody else in your family is gaming, watching Netflix, doing any other calls. Make sure that if you're trying to do a Zoom lesson, everyone in the rest of the family is not doing anything.
It's kind of like back to the days of DSL.
Kind of, yes. And so, especially on a normal home internet connection, for most families that are just at a standard connection speed, it's perfectly fine if there's nothing else gobbling up that bandwidth. And so most connection speeds are going to be advertised somewhere around 30, 10, some are 12, 6. Usually the upload is half the speed of the download. And that's perfectly sufficient to do a standard definition call. The problem is when you have, Microsoft Office in the right corner downloading something at 2 or 3 megabytes per second and taking away a lot of that bandwidth. So what's important is if you check with families and kill off as many tray icons as you possibly can before you start doing your lesson. And so for Windows computers, that's going to be the little icons in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click that little up arrow, you'll probably see a whole bunch of colorful little icons. Those are all applications that are currently running, and some of them are going to be running and taking up your connection speed, some are going to take up RAM, and some are going to take up your CPU. We want to clear out as much of that as possible so that the call can be clear.
Let's see. How do you think we shall answer any final questions?
So, anybody, if you have your last questions, here's your chance.
We'll just take them through the chat box, you think?
Yep.
Okay.
Not seeing anything come through right now. And so
there was a so I wrote down a couple of questions from earlier. Janice, I don't know if Janice is still here. Janice was asking how to do a meeting how to do like a seminar meeting for parents, and you would do it the same kind of way that
Yep.
that we've done this meeting. If you want to have a large meeting for more than 40 minutes, then you're going to have to upgrade
Yes.
to Pro, because the free version, Zoom has lifted certain restrictions on their free account due to the pandemic, but still you can only have a maximum of 3 people on a call for longer than 40 minutes. So you could have a seminar with your entire studio of parents, but it would be for a maximum of 40 minutes if you are still working with the free version. So that would be my answer to that. You're gonna make a Zoom meeting for your parents, email the link out to all of them. It's going to have a certain time that it starts, and everyone gathers there, and you'll be the host, just like you are when you're teaching, and you can talk to your parents like that. So that would be that. Emily Bowman asked earlier how to find the settings on an iPad for an alternative microphone. And Drew, I don't have an iPad, so I wasn't able to answer that question.
So when you're doing that, the iPad will often detect it automatically. iPads are designed for really, really good plug and play. So I don't have one of these to demonstrate right now. I do have some students who use an external mic on their iPad. Once they plug it in, it'll come up on their iPad. It'll say, do you want to use this device? Do you want to allow permissions? Once they say yes, it should automatically be using that microphone until the students unplug it. So there's really not a whole lot of settings available on the iPad, and you really don't need them. If you're going to use something like the Zoom microphone, there is a gain setting dial on the microphone itself. And so there is a little bit of adjustment on how loud or soft they're going to be recording to you, and the quality, or then the gain of that as well. And so the iPad pretty much is designed from the ground up to be as simple as possible. And so, yeah, no more settings through the app.
We got a question from Arco Cyrus. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. How do we clear out those processes? Can you clarify what processes you mean?
Sure. So I think she or he is talking about all of the extra stuff that your computer's running in the background. So if you're running a Windows computer, this is a much bigger deal than if you're running a Mac. And so if you click on the bottom bar, the taskbar of your computer, and then go up to Task Manager, so right click in the bottom bar, Task Manager, it'll open up a whole list of all of the things that your computer's running. And so I'll share this with everybody right now so you can see just how much, even my computer, which is pretty lean, you can see just how much this thing is running. Now, you can see that Zoom is using a ton of power, and it's using a pretty fair amount of my CPU and my memory. All of these other processes are things that are running in the background. So things like my keyboard, things like the computer processes in the background, and this list is actually pretty small compared to what most computers have. Here's my antivirus, stuff like that. Now, what you can do is if you don't want something, like say if I don't want Audacity running anymore, I can just hit End Task, and then it kills off that program, and it removes some of the load from my computer. And so you can do this for anything that's not essential. I would not recommend killing off system functions because those will start making things like icons disappear on your desktop. It'll make your start menu disappear, stuff like that. But if you're not using programs in the background, they're still using up your system resources, then that will take away from what's available for your computer to use toward the call. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Cool. Okay, well, I guess we will wrap it up for today. If anybody has any future questions, Henry is available for doing some one-on-one Skype things, or not Skype things, Zoom meeting things. And so please feel free to reach out to Henry about this. Like I said, I will make a video or a link available through my website, and I'll post that to the group chat just a couple minutes after this ends with all of my system recommendations and the hardware recommendations that we talked about today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Henry, for hosting this, and I hope this was beneficial for all the teachers. So
I'm glad that we could have this interview.
Either give a thumbs up, or hit the thumbs up button in the reactions. Thank you so much to everybody for tuning in, and I hope everybody has a successful teaching experience online.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.